Hi, and welcome again to Off the Page. My name is Leslie Choice. My guest today is Kenneth Oppel, and he's written about 13 books, if I have that right, and the two most recent are fictional tales for young readers about bats. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, Sunwing and Silverwing, they're fairly sophisticated novels for teenagers or even kids a little bit younger, and they're about intelligent bats. Isn't that hard to convince your reader to get into that world?
Well, most people thought I was crazy when I said I was writing about bats. I think part of the problem initially was most people don't have very good associations with bats. They think they're ugly and scary, and people think of rabies and vampires. And so they thought, why would you want to write about bats? But that was, in a way, precisely the reason I chose bats. They were so unlikely.
They're not lovable and cuddly.
They aren't cuddly.
I'm one of those people who actually had one fall from a roof into my hair and get caught in my hair at one point.
Yeah.
And that was okay.
You didn't scream in terror.
No, but they're ugly. You look at them and they have that demonic face.
See, I don't think they are really. I mean, some species are, but the northern ones, I actually held one in my hand a couple weeks ago, a large brown bat, and they're very sweet. I mean, their teeth are very sharp, but their faces are, not unlike, mice, a mouse face.
And they're not that interested in biting you.
I
really.
don't think so, no. So I kind of like the idea of taking a definitely non-cuddly animal and trying to make them appealing and trying to, prove to myself that I could make them interesting characters. And I like the Gothic associations. I've always been drawn to sort of Gothic subject matters. And so bats were right up my alley. I could write about a nighttime world, and I could write about a world that was only seen in black and white, because bats only see in black and white.
Ooh, that's right.
And
you can't use any colors in your story.
No, so there's no colors in the books. And I tried to use the bat's echolocation, which is their own form of sonar, just get across the bat's point of view. So there are a whole bunch of, formal and subject matter sort of, appeals.
Is that part of what you admire about the bats? They have this great sonar. They can bounce off of things and know where they are. What else?
I think so. It's just great. It's unusual, and that to me, I wanted to sort of do something that hadn't been done before, and no one has really written a novel about bats from a bat's point of view. So it was all this uncharted territory.
Well, introduce me to the world of Shade, your main character in these two novels.
Well, Shade is a young silver wing bat. He's based on a silver-haired bat, and he's the runt of his colony. As Silver Wing opens, he's about to embark on his first ever migration to the south, to a place called Hibernaculum, which is where the bats hibernate for the winter. And he only has an echo map to help him find his way. And it becomes important in the story because he gets separated from his mother and his colony. And all he has are these fragments of a map. And it's an unusual kind of map. I invented this idea of a sonic map. I thought, since bats see with echoes,
yes.
Was it not possible, in a fantastical sort of way, for bats to actually sing echoes into other bats' ears and draw echo pictures in their heads?
It would be like a song that tells you where to go.
That's right, and it's like a series of sonic images that flare up inside the bat's head. And Shade has to decipher these images, because he's never been on the route. He doesn't know what these things are, but he has to solve them. That's part of the puzzle of the story.
Is that where you get to make the leap of your imagination, where you can take a bit of science and then you just make the jump?
Yeah, because I thought it was important to have a very strong foundation. So all the details about what bats eat and how they fly, how they use their echolocation, what they eat, their migratory routes, that is based on pretty sound fact. And once I've sort of established that and I've made the reader sort of trust the world of bats, then I can invent the things like the song maps and the echo chamber, which is this spherical chamber where the bats tell their history orally, and it reverberates amongst these walls sort of for hundreds of years, and that's how the bats store their history.
There must be some trick or some skill that a writer uses to convince the willing or sometimes the unwilling reader to make their own leap into that particular world, and then be willing to go along with all of this stuff that's so fanciful. How do you do that?
Well, I think part of it is as I said, establishing the sort of the realism, the inherent sort of believability of the world, and then it's the characters. Because I think if you have characters who the reader identifies with, they'll travel with him. So Shade is really, you think, well, I'm not going anywhere with a bat, but Shade is basically an 11-year-old child. He's he's an underdog. He's sort of restless. He's a bit abrasive. He's always out to prove himself, and I think kids lock on to him because every kid's felt like an underdog at some point in their lives. And I think once they've latched onto the character, they'll go with him.
That's interesting. Now, I know there are certain religious aspects to the story, but in human history, where do bats tend to appear in mythology or religion or history?
Well, they appear in a lot of creation myths, mostly about the animal kingdom. I mean, there's a great one about a rat who, was tired of being a rat, and he climbs up a tree one night to a sleeping bird and cuts off the bird's wings with his teeth and fixes the wings to his own body,
Sure, sounds
and flies
logical
off
to
into
me.
the night, and that's a rat becomes a bat. So there's a lot of creation myths because there's always a lot of confusion about, well, is a bat a bird or a beast, and why do they fly at night? And in some cultures, I mean, in European culture, they've always been associated with, sort of witchcraft and the
Vampires, of course.
vampires in the underworld. But it's interesting. I mean, in Chinese culture, they're good luck symbols. So there's a very big mix of reactions to bats.
So in other cultures, though, they do have positive attributes.
Yeah, in most they're not so positive. I mean, I use a lot of Mayan sort of mythology as one of the sources for my own mythology that I create. And the Mayans had a bat deity called Camazotz, who is a bat god of the underworld. So unbeatable.
Who are the enemies for Shade and the likable characters? In your
Well, there's sort of two sets. One is the owls. The bats in my book are sort of banished creatures. They're being punished for a transgression they supposedly committed millions of years ago in a great battle.
Which is what many adolescents feel.
Totally
bottom sense,
persecuted. And they're not permitted to fly in the light of day. If they see the sun, they're allowed to be hunted down by the owls and killed. So the owls are these guardians over the skies. And so that's one sort of level of antagonism that the bats face. The other is from their own species or from their own family, and these are the flesh-eating bats who are from the family Vampirum spectrum. And there's two characters called in Silverwing, Goth and Throb, who have been
you have to
transported.
watch out for them.
Yes, yes. They've been transported from the jungle to the northern city, and they escape from their pen, or they're being studied by the humans for some reason, and they hook up with the heroes of Silverwing and
Now,
use them.
humans are not good guys in this book's Sunwing, anyway.
No,
Yeah.
no, they're ambivalent at best. It's not all. I don't think all humans are meant to be portrayed as villains, but there's certainly a group, a faction of humanity that is definitely antagonistic.
What are they doing to your
To my
kindly
bats?
here?
They're using the bats to fight their war for them. This is in Sunwing.
How would you do that?
Well, in fact, this is based on a real historical incident that I discovered in my research. During the Second World War, the U.S. military had a top-secret project called Project X-Ray.
Leave it to the U.S. military.
All right,
Yeah.
and their idea was to surgically suture explosive devices onto bats and use the bats to deliver these, incendiary devices over certain targets.
And they could train the bats to go in the
Well,
right direction.
it never really worked because they tried to train the bats, but this is, and it's such poetic justice, the bats weren't cooperative, and a whole bunch escaped from the test range and blew up some army buildings.
Oh,
The
good old
project was
bats,
scrapped. But I use that historical story as a big part of the plot in Sunwing.
They're being experimented upon and
Yes.
there's testing and things like that. Yeah, I always felt bad for those pigeons. Apparently the U.S. military had used pigeons to sit in the nose cones of missiles somehow to direct them. This didn't seem right. Or the dolphins that carried weapons
Yes.
in various places.
Yeah.
I guess mankind has used animals for military purposes.
For quite a while.
Yeah,
in
horses
one
and
form or
everything
another.
else.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about the religious aspects in this novel itself? In one of the interviews that I read about you, you said something about Shade, and there's the religious elements of the book do have something to do with your personal feelings and background in religion.
Well, yeah. I mean, I personally am interested in religion, all sorts of religions, and the idea of religion. And the book is in no way an allegory on religion. There's no one sort of religious model that I'm sort of emulating or getting at. I don't have a religious point to prove in the books. But I take my own interest in religion, I guess, a way through Shade's character, because Shade is very curious, and he's confronted with a bunch of conflicting creation myths and views of history, views of the war, and who's to blame, who's culpable. And also, there's two competing sort of deities in the book. And Shade, like all kids, wants to know the truth. And if there's any point in the book, it's that the truth is a very slippery thing. And it's not possible most of the time to know the truth. So that is as far as really the religious.
Is there a mistrust of organized religion that comes out through Shea?
No, I don't think so. There's a mistrust of received wisdom or unconsidered wisdom. If the book is about anything, it's about sort of always challenging stereotypes. I mean, there's a lot of sort of instances of different sort of cults and factions in the book that Shade encounters on his quest, and a lot of them are very intolerant or even fanatical. And basically some of these are very tempting to him. He ultimately eschews them. Just because he can't really in his heart believe that such exclusionary things are right.
Yeah.
So that's as far as the religious. It's an element in the book. I think of it more as competing mythologies.
What was your own religious background? You grew up on Vancouver Island, was it?
Yeah, Vancouver Island, and also spent 4 years in Halifax later on. No, I had no formal religious upbringing. My parents had been, when they were younger, members of a church, a Protestant church, and I think later a Baptist church.
But that didn't figure into.
Well, I mean, maybe it all sort of, I'm sure those things sort of, stay
there.
with you and sort of work into your, your upbringing or your world outlook. But no, I was brought up in no sort of, formally religious way. But I became interested in religion, on my own, and was very, curious about learning more about it.
What were you reading when you were young?
Well, how far back are we going here?
Oh, go as far back as you
back.
like and take us forward, or whatever
Curious
pops in
George.
your mind. It was a heavily influential book.
Yes.
Yeah.
I liked all my books. I tended to like books about boy geniuses and inventors. I liked.
Oh yeah, was there a whole series of books?
Yeah, there was a series of books called The Mad Scientist Club by Bertrand Brinley. I adored those books. They made submarines. I mean, there's no stopping them. They just did incredible things. The Great Brain books by, who did those? Fitzgerald.
These are the experiments that we all wished we could perform, or the inventions we wished we could create.
I guess.
When
I
we
think it
were
was
young.
also just the, just sort of, this is a conniving older brother always sort of swindling his younger brother. I was a younger brother, so I think I felt, kinship with the younger brother in those stories. I read a lot of Roald Dahl, and loved those. Danny the Champion of the World.
A British writer wrote kids' books then. A lot of dark stuff in Roald Dahl, wasn't there?
Yeah. And
Gothic even, I suppose.
Yeah, and he's always roundly criticized. And there is much that is reprehensible about some of his books. Now that I'm a parent, I read some of his books to my kid and find myself sort of censoring some of the more, explicit.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Well, that's one of the tamer ones, I think.
Okay.
It's relatively benign.
Yeah.
Some of the more horrible ones are, I think, Matilda and The Twits and George's Marvelous Medicine.
Yeah, watch out for them, huh?
Yeah. But no, and when I was older, I started reading a sort of a mix of sort of children's writers and writers like George Orwell and Hemingway and things like that. And it was a mixed diet until I was, high school.
And here you are, writing books yourself. We're going to take a short break. My guest today is Kenneth Oppel. We're talking about his fiction novels, Sunwing, Silverwing, about bats and their world, and we'll be back right after this. And welcome back to Off the Page. My guest is Kenneth Oppel. 13 books, I think it was, published?
Well, Sunwing is, I think, number 16.
16, okay,
Yeah.
that's right. We're always a little bit behind in the beginning. What was your first book that you wrote?
First book was called Colin's Fantastic Video Adventure.
This sounds a lot like one of those boy genius kinds of things.
Well, it's another it's a video game addiction book. I wrote it in the summer holidays when I was 14, and then rewrote it the next year when I was 15, and I was going through a big video game phase, and I realized I couldn't play video games all the time, but I could maybe write about video games.
And how old were you when it was published?
I was 17, I think. I just graduated from high school.
There you go, the child genius type.
Well, it was just writing was my thing. I wasn't a kid who spent a lot of time on sports teams or it was sort of, it became my hobby and my passion, and that was the thing that it started in school. I just always liked creative writing, and more I just do it on my own time. So come Christmas or summer holidays, I'd write maybe a short story and poetry, and then the stories gradually got longer until I wrote it was a short book. That one it was like 100 pages or something. But it was very much in the style of Roald Dahl.
He was a heavy influence on you.
Very much.
Yeah.
And so in a strange kind of way, when I look at that book, it's very unlike what I write now. It's very British. That sense of humor, the sort of the structure of the story. But yeah, no, it was a great break.
With this book and the last two books that you're writing here, we mentioned that there was this gothic tradition. Could you define what gothic is? I'm not sure I always know. You know, I think of bats in dark places and castles and evil something or other happening in the perimeters.
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to be able to give you the tried and true literary definition. I think it's the things, when I use it, it's what you said. It's that sort of, you know, the medieval, the dark, the dark underbelly of things. You know, it's almost more a decorative word in my mind, or aesthetic. It's the look, you know, of a book and the feel.
But this gothic feel is very attractive now to a certain number of teenagers and young people. What do you think that attraction is?
I think it's part of the iconoclasm of teenagers. I mean, there's something very powerful aesthetically about it, dressing in black, and if you're talking about the goth look, and you know, sort of darkening your lips, and you know, it gets into the whole association with, you know, the occult. You know, there's that leaning too, which I think appeals to a lot of kids.
Oh no! But have you been accused of sort of feeding
no
demonic
there's
things
none
to
of
young
you know,
readers yet? None of that.
Not at all.
When you're writing, in the process, you're sitting at a word processor, are you?
Yep.
Okay. How does it kick in? How do you lose yourself into the world that you're writing about?
Well.
Or are you very much in control?
Well, I'm controlled in that I make myself do it every day. A lot of the time it's just sheer diligence. You know, I'm sitting in front of that screen, and well, it's, you know, I find writing hard. It's hard. I talk to a lot of writers, and I'm not sure if they're lying to me, but they often tell me how wonderful it is to write, and how the characters just sort of leap off the screen and pull them in and dictate,
and grinding your teeth.
Yeah, and I think you're either lying or it's totally unfair. But I just force myself to write, and even if I write some bad sentences, you know, they'll become better. I know I can go back and rewrite. The important thing for me is just to write, and I have a word quota that I try to, you know, reach every day.
That sounds very much like a job.
Well, you know, writing became my job, you know, about, like 6-7 years ago, full time. And I thought, if this is gonna be my living, it's gonna be a job, and I'm gonna treat it like a job. I'm not gonna wait around for inspiration, because I don't really believe that that's, you know, the driving force of a writer. It's the diligence and the perseverance and rewriting, and to me, all the good stuff comes in the writing. You know, I take notes before I start a story. I usually have an outline, so I know where I'm going, but it always changes. I think that's where a lot of the good stuff comes in.
You leave that element of surprise in there for your readers.
Yeah.
For yourself, I suppose,
yeah,
while you're writing your story.
I guess.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, though, that it is very much like work, and it's a pragmatic kind of process. There are some of those other writers out there, you know, that just let it flow. But those...
There are moments. I mean, there are moments where you have a really great day, and everything seems to click into place. But you know, I never romanticize it when kids ask, you know, at schools. I go to schools, and I think kids expect me just to sort of...
be a writer?
Yeah. To get hit by a lightning bolt.
I want to be a writer, too.
I'm just going to write. But it's hard work.
What are the ages of your readers for novels like this? Silverwing.
Well, it starts at about 8, and has really gone all the way up to adult. I'm always very pleased when, you know, grown-ups come and say, you know, totally enjoyed your book, you know, because you know, obviously when you write a book, you want it to have the biggest audience possible. Even though it's ostensibly a children's book, you don't like to think that only children are going to read it, because a good book should be able to be read by any age group.
When I pick this up, though, and I thumb through and I see the number of words and the number of pages and the small print, I'm kind of overwhelmed at the thought that kids as young as 8 years old are reading a book like this. Parents, teachers, publishers sometimes are misjudging how sophisticated kids really are. Do you think?
I think so. I mean, at the very low end, I mean, some of those kids maybe are getting it read to them. But I think kids like the sort of the breadth of the book, and they like the size of it, and they get to really immerse themselves in a fantasy world. And certainly when I write, I'm not conscious of writing for an age group.
Yes.
I'm writing the story, and the story is guided by the character. And in this case, the character is basically an adolescent, pre-adolescent, and that informs, you know, how I write about things, and because it's from his point of view. But I'm not sort of crossing out words. Oh, that's too difficult. That's too sophisticated. Oh, that's assimilated.
That would be a kind of self-censorship that would
Yeah,
really
and I
interfere
think
with
that's
the
horrible.
process, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Here's the classic question of a children's author, though. When you write these stories, do you go back to yourself at 8, 9, 10 years old in some form? I know they're not autobiographical unless you were a bat at one time.
I don't.
But do you draw from that part of your life?
I guess so. I think that's almost one of the necessary things about writing for kids is you have to have a good sense of empathy or still remember what it's like to be a kid. I mean, it's hard. I started writing kids' books when I was still relatively young, in my early 20s, and it's very hard to even go back 10 years. But yes, I mean, when I write a story, I'm trying to write the kind of stories I would have liked to read, that would have excited me, but also filled me with that sense of security and comfort and coziness that you got reading books as a kid, because those were the things that really made me want to write kids' books, just to recapture that pleasure.
Where do you think really good, powerful stories come from?
Oh, everyday life, everyone's personal experience. I'm never so worried about where the ideas come from. I mean, the ideas are important, but it's what you do with them and how you shape them, so that they're sort of universal, they sort of connect with people.
Do you trust your imagination to make
I have
those
so
connections
far.
for you? Yeah.
I don't think it's taken me too far off the beaten track.
Well, that's good. Well, 16 books down the line. My guest today has been Kenneth Oppel. We're going to take a very short break and tie things up right after this. Welcome back to Off the Page. My guest today has been Kenneth Oppel. Is there going to be a sequel to Sun Wing? You've done a Silver Wing and a Sun Wing, and this sort of your publisher's
sequel.
Yeah, probably setting you up here.
Well, when I finished Silver Wing, I wasn't entirely convinced there would be a sequel at all. I'd left, there's a bit of it's not a cliffhanger ending, but there's a couple of loose threads at the end of Silver Wing, and I sort of intended it that way because I'd always liked books that left you wanting more,
yes,
and left a couple things unresolved just because it was too pat to tie everything up. And also, I like the idea that the world goes on, after the book is over.
As it should.
Yeah, you can imagine this is a real
echo of sorts
it
that
sort of keeps going. But kids wrote and wrote, and they had two questions in all their letters. I got hundreds and hundreds of letters, and they said, is there going to be a sequel? Does Shade find his father? And I hadn't realized how important that was going to be to kids. This ongoing quest. It was one element of Silver Wing, Shade's search for his dad. But talk about being able to put yourself back in the mind of a kid. I'd forgotten how, of course, for an 11-year-old, finding the father, your parent is paramount. And I had the idea. When I was rewriting Silver Wing, I got, the idea for the next stage. And at one point, I was actually going to, make a much bigger book, and that would have sort of involved what's now Sun Wing. It would have been a huge, long thing, but I decided, no, I was going to keep them discreet, and so I saved
kids are probably ready for it. The one final quick question, in any way are bats superior to people, in your estimation?
Well, so far they haven't shown the propensity for evil that humans have. So in that way, they're head and shoulders above us.
And there's something to admire bats for. Thanks for coming to Halifax and being on the show.
Thank you.
And thanks for watching Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice, and I'll see you again next time.